Oh, my name is Lola Odelola, and I am a developer advocate for Samsung Internet. Today, I would like to speak to you about the global privacy control versus do not track. There has been a lot of hoo-ha in the privacy community about whether the global privacy control is going to be useful, whether it's going to have the same fate as do not track. And I'm hoping today that I can address some of those concerns and answer some of those questions. But before we get into it, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Samsung Internet browser. This is a browser that's available on the Google Apple, the Google Apple App Store, not the Google Apple Store, the Google App Store, and it is a Chromium-based browser that's maintained by Samsung. And the whole idea behind it is that for those who are privacy aware, who are power users, so to speak, they can use this without a cause for concern. It has features such as ad blocking, tracking prevention, and a fully customizable interface. So if that's you or if you're interested, definitely check Samsung Internet out. You can download it on Google Play and it's available to use on any Android device. Okay, so let's get into tracking. Why do we track in the first instance? I think the main reason a lot of people know is for advertising. Tracking is kind of crucial to the advertising industry, especially since we've moved a lot of ads online. It's a good way to know who likes what, and serve them the things that they like or the things that they might like based on their behaviors. We also track to have analytics and to know the kind of content people are interested in. Social media tracks for similar reasons. And just in general, to understand user behavior online. That's what tracking is for. And anonymous tracking is the kind of like ideal whereby you don't get anything linked to you or tied to you. Now, there are a few ways that companies and websites track these days. One of those ways is by using cookies. Now, cookies are a browser level stateful storage. And what do I mean by stateful storage? Right. So let's say you go to Facebook and you log in on day one, right? And you close your laptop, you come back on day 30 and you open your laptop again and you go into your browser and you're still logged in. That could be, not necessarily, could be because Facebook is using cookies to see whether you're logged in or not. The state in this case is login. Are they logged in? True. Are they logged in? False. That's kind of what we mean by stateful storage. And so cookies are a good way to track things like logins. Things also like user preferences. For example, if you visit a site and they have a dark mode and you prefer to view the site in dark mode, instead of setting dark mode every time you come back to the site, the web developers could allow you to store that preference of dark mode in the cookie. So when you come back to the site, the dark mode is already set. You don't even have to think about it. And you can just continue browsing seamlessly. Another way it's used is for like shopping baskets when you go online and you're doing your grocery shopping or your clothes shopping or whatever it is you're buying, and you close the tab. You come back and your basket is still full. These are the kind of things that cookies are used for and what they're good for. Now, another good thing, in my opinion, about cookies is that they are user controlled. So to an extent, at least. So if you decide you no longer want certain companies to have certain information about you, you don't want them to be storing the state of things, you can just delete your cookies and that'll be that. Now, the issue that this presents to the people that care about that data is that there's no way for them to know that you've A, deleted those cookies, and B, there's no way for them to kind of make you store those cookies again unless you visit the site and go through those user journeys, which means there's no way for them to like serve you things if they were storing other things in those cookies. Now, the thing about cookies, though, is that they give the browser a unique identifier. And once you give the browser a unique identifier, you're kind of inadvertently giving the user a unique identifier too. And that becomes a real problem. because then things aren't anonymous anymore. So we've got cookies. They're better for the user, but they're not necessarily great for ad people, and they're not actually that great for user when you consider the fact that you could potentially be identifying unique users, right? So then we have fingerprinting, which is kind of like an evolution to cookies in a way, right? So as I said with cookies, they are on a browser level, which means the user has a lot of control, or at least a little bit of control over them. With fingerprinting, the user doesn't have control at all, because the data is stored on the server in the website's database. And that is kind of like the real big issue here, because then users do not have direct access to that information. They can't delete it if they wanted to, just by the flick of a button, right? Now, the kind of information that fingerprinting takes is usually stuff that's in the HTTP headers. I will speak a little bit more about HTTP headers in a little while, but it's stuff like IP address, user agent, and really anything else, any other metadata that the website can grab, that it wants to grab, that is necessary. And all sorts of metadata can be sent, can be defined and sent over a request, right? Now, this is better for obviously the ad people, but it is not necessarily great for the user. An issue we've seen in the past is where leaked data from social media sites exposes user names, handles, all sorts of information about users, and links it to the rest of the information being sent. So again, that data becomes not anonymous anymore, and that's a privacy nightmare. So, both of these situations are not great for the user ultimately, whether it's cookies, whether it's fingerprinting. And there are also a bunch of other ways tracking is implemented, such as super cookies and all of these other things, but ultimately boils down to the same thing of the user privacy being infringed on, and also users not being able to necessarily control how companies use their data, and also if they take the data in the first place, and if they want to remove that data. So, people kind of got fed up with it. It's 2009. We are recovering from the 2008 financial crash, and everyone is like supercharged, excited, because you know what? We've we've seen the worst, and I know how ironic that sounds in 2021. But we've seen the worst, and now we are like hopeful. We want to make a change, want to make positive change. And people are fed up, honestly. Internet users are fed up. Tech workers are also fed up. We want to create a good way for user privacy to be respected. And so that introduces Do Not Track. Now, Do Not Track tries to address the issue with cookies and fingerprinting in the sense of giving users more control over who is allowed to track them, and of whether they want to be tracked in the first instance. So Do Not Track is a HTTP header. And what a HTTP header is when you are on a website, for example, a grocery website, and you are shopping along and you see, oh, I would like some strawberries. You add the strawberries to the basket. When you perform that action of adding, it sends a response to the server. And then the server then does something with that response, and then it sends a request to the server. The server does something with that request, and then it sends you a response back. And in that request, you will send some headers, right? And one of those headers might be your user agent, and other metadata, as I spoke about before. And what Do Not Track was wanting to do is add a new header, the Do Not Track header, that says this person doesn't want to be tracked, so do not track them. Simple as that. And so you would set it, and it would be with every request that you send, regardless of whatever website you're on. You would say, I don't want to be tracked. And the ideal scenario would be companies would respect that and they would not track you. Now, the kind of story behind Do Not Track is a little bit sad, a little bit convoluted. So I'm going to try and reduce it and paraphrase it. But essentially, it was proposed as a legal policy, and then the law folks were like, nah, we don't want to deal with this. Send this to the W3C. Now, W3C are the worldwide consortium, and they deal with like web standards and things like that, essentially how we should be using the web. They define how we should be using the web. And so it kind of made sense actually that, DNT fell within W3C. So they are all excited. They have a working group and, standards are draft and all of this kind of thing. Then the Digital Advertising Alliance, like the biggest advertising trade body, pulls out. And then things kind of begin to fall apart within the W3C. Then the Electronic Frontier Foundation adopts it, and they try to make it more robust, with also not only having the header, but a browser extension, which enforces the no tracking thing. And it just kind of like gets swept away because ultimately Do Not Track is unenforceable, right? Like you cannot enforce Do Not Track. There was no legal component behind Do Not Track. So if companies didn't respect it, which many of them did not respect it, there were no legal ramifications. There were no technical repercussions for ignoring the signal. And so it kind of just fell by the wayside. And a lot of people lost hope with Do Not Track specifically, and also just tracking in general. And I think this is why a lot of people are kind of doubtful of the global privacy control, which I will be speaking about in a little while, because we've seen how something which was, good, which was supported, can kind of fall by the wayside and not get the respect it deserves. And ultimately, we see how user request, user desire is ultimately ignored, right? Okay, so then things kind of change. We have the laws that come into place now. We have GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation for the EU. We have the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. We have Lei Geral de Protecção de Dados, LGPD, which is the Brazil version of these things. And we have the Personal Information Protection Act, which is Bermuda's version of these things. And to be honest, there are a load of these kind of laws which are not exactly the same, but all deal with similar things, right? It's all about protecting user privacy, protecting user data. CCPA in particular speaks of it in the context of advertising and selling. So in that context, the user is a consumer, but typically speaking, we're looking at just users, regular people, you, myself, your family who use the internet, and how these laws look at how do we protect these people? How do we make sure they know what they're, signing up for? And not only that, but they can opt in or opt out of their data being sold or being tracked, right? And that really lays the foundation in a way for the introduction of the global privacy control. So the global privacy control is similar to Do Not Track. I'm not going to pretend that it's this kind of like innovative, novel thing. It's quite similar to Do Not Track, but there are differences. Now, just a bit of background about the global privacy control. It started off it started off in a university of a group of students and a lecturer who worked on it, and then it got adopted by a group of companies such as the EFF, Brave, the New York Times, DuckDuckGo, and a few other companies who are very interested and who care about the privacy of users, who care about giving users more power over their own data and over themselves, their internet behavior, right? And so this group of companies invested engineering hours into making this something that could be quite useful. And since then, it has also now fallen under the work of the W3C, specifically within the privacy community group, which is public and open to anybody who wants to join and see what's being discussed. Like, you can just pop into a meeting and see what's being discussed and see what's being worked on. But essentially, the goal is to have this as a web standard that, similar to Do Not Track, will have a header, a HTTP header, where users can set their tracking preference. Now, the default is to have users opt in, but this isn't a permanent decision, right? Because the idea behind GPC is that it works in conjunction with these laws. Now, the first law that it, wants to work in conjunction with is the CCPA law, which is California's law, which, as I said before, is kind of a little bit more about selling and advertising and things like this. So in that specific law, the law states that the user has a right to opt out, which means by default they have opted in. However, other laws such as GDPR require users to opt in. So there is still some work to be done of making global privacy control applicable and flexible enough to be able to be used regardless of what law it's trying to work with, right? And I did speak to one of the key people on the team, Robin Bergeron, who is the VP of Data Governance at the New York Times. And what he said is GPC is a mechanism to use various laws where possible to bring users to where the default should be, and the default defined by the law. And so that's going to be the global privacy controls big thing. But the key thing here that we should recognize is that GPC is working with current legal frameworks to allow consumers and users and companies an easy way to obey the law and respect users' privacy. And because it's working with these legal frameworks, it hypothetically, I do want to say hypothetically, could be enforceable, because there is a legal requirement to respect users' privacy and users' data, right? And I think that's something to be happy about. That's something to be hopeful for. So what's next? Well, the GPC itself is still in the infant stages, and more work needs to be done to figure out how it will work with the legal frameworks outside of CCPA, as I mentioned before. However, this work is happening in public in the privacy community group. So if you're interested, if you want to know more, you can pop in to the privacy community group and see what's being spoken about. And yeah, you can come and see what we're doing and be excited with us. If you have opinions, if you have concerns, if you have questions, we have a GitHub which you can check out as well. So it's all public, and we do encourage input from the public, from you folks. So yeah, stay tuned to what's happening. And that's it for my talk. Thank you so much. Thanks for bearing with me, technical difficulties and what have you. I'm available on Twitter at Lola Odelola. So if you want to ask me any questions, you can do that. I'm available to ask anything. So yeah, thank you very much.